dragging itself across the window, leaving behind a trail of coldness that seemed to freeze the air around him. His eyes locked onto it, unable to look away, his mind screaming at him to look forward, to focus on the road. But the hand was impossible to ignore. It was there, right outside the car, inches from him, pressing against the glass. And then it began to tap. The tapping grew faster, harder, more frantic. Tap, 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 tap. The sound echoed in the car, filling his ears, drowning out everything else. His chest tightened, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. He could hear it now, loud and clear, the sound of someone desperately trying to get his attention, trying to be heard. He slammed his foot down on the brake. The car jerked to a stop, and the tires screeched against the road, the sound of rubber against asphalt ringing in his ears. The car was still for a moment, and for the first time in what felt like hours, everything was silent. The tapping had stopped. The world outside was still, the dark highway stretching out before him, empty and silent. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps as he sat there, frozen, the car's engine idling softly. His mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What was happening? Was he losing his mind? Was this real? Or was it some horrible hallucination brought on by exhaustion? For a moment, everything felt eerily normal. The seatbelt was still fastened, the interior of the car unchanged. He looked down at his hands, still gripping the wheel tightly, the tension in his fingers and wrists almost unbearable. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. But then, from the rearview mirror, he saw something, a shadow. At first, it was small, faint, almost imperceptible, but it grew, stretching across the seat, across the window, until it filled the entire rearview mirror. It was dark, black, and for a moment Daniel thought it was a trick of the light. But then, it moved. A figure, tall and imposing, appeared behind him in the reflection, looming over him like a dark presence. The woman's face, once pale and haunting, was now clearer, sharper, and twisted. Her eyes, hollow and empty, locked onto his through the mirror, and her mouth stretched into a grotesque, gaping smile. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't soft, it wasn't distant. It was right next to him, in his ear, cold and filled with malice. "You almost left me behind," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. And then, everything went dark. The headlights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, leaving Daniel in total blackness. The engine sputtered, the car's tires screeched as if in agony, and the world around him was swallowed by an impenetrable void. He tried to scream, but his voice was caught in his throat. His hands reached for the door handle, but the door was locked, the window sealed shut. There was no escape. There was no way out. The woman's figure loomed larger and larger, her smile stretching impossibly wide, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The car trembled, the shadows inside it darkening and swirling, as though they were alive, pulling him in. He could feel the cold, the darkness creeping over him like a thick fog, smothering everything in its path. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness faded. The car was still, the engine silent. The headlights were no longer working, and the road in front of him was a vast, empty void. The car had come to a complete stop. Daniel opened his eyes, his chest heaving, his heart racing. He was no longer in the car. He was outside, standing in the middle of the road. The night was still and quiet. The air was crisp, cold, and untouched. The highway stretched ahead, its emptiness infinite. The car was gone. The The woman was gone, and yet he still felt her presence, the weight of her gaze pressing against him from the shadows. "You almost left me behind," the whisper echoed one last time, fading into the night. It didn't move like a normal broadcast signal. It wasn't a ghostly afterimage of an old show bleeding through lost frequencies. It was deliberate, a slow, creeping presence that seemed aware of her as much as she was aware of it. Margaret found herself watching the TV more than she intended. Hours would pass as she sat in front of the screen, eyes scanning the shifting static, waiting for the figure to appear. And it always did. Just for a second, just long enough to make her stomach twist in fear before it was gone again. She should have unplugged it. She should have thrown it away. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because the moment she turned it off, she had the strangest feeling that whatever was inside the TV wasn't just trapped there. It was watching, waiting. Margaret didn't remember falling asleep. She woke to the sound of static, the low, buzzing hum filling the apartment like a distant storm. The television was still on, casting its flickering white glow across the darkened living room. She blinked, disoriented. Her neck ached from sleeping in such an awkward position, curled up in the chair opposite the screen. The static moved. A ripple through the noise, barely noticeable but unmistakable. She stared, pulse hammering. It was there again, the shape. No longer just a shadow lost in the interference, but something more distinct, more present. It was closer. Margaret's breath hitched. She rubbed her eyes, willing herself to wake up fully, to shake off the remnants of sleep. But when she looked back at the screen, the figure was still there. It hadn't vanished like before. It stood just beyond the shifting static, its form obscured, but undeniably humanoid. Too still, too deliberate. She reached for the remote with shaking hands. The screen flickered violently, as if reacting to her movement. She froze, gripping the remote so tightly her knuckles turned white. The static deepened, the buzzing growing louder, and for a moment, she swore she heard something beneath the noise. A voice, maybe, or breathing. The lights in the apartment flickered. Her stomach twisted with a sick, instinctual fear. She turned the TV off. The silence that followed was suffocating. Margaret sat there, staring at her own dim reflection in the blank screen, heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to tell herself it was nothing, just a malfunction, a trick of the eyes, exhaustion playing games with her perception. But she knew better. That night she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it. The shifting static, the shape moving closer, the strange sensation of being watched. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with that buzzing noise, the flickering screen, and the overwhelming certainty that she was not alone. The next evening, despite everything, she turned the TV back on. She didn't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear, that if she ignored it, it would get worse. The static returned immediately, violent and erratic. She held her breath, waiting. The figure was there, and it was closer than before. No longer just a distant shape lost in the interference. It had moved forward. It stood at the edge of the screen now, its form still obscured, but its presence undeniable. Margaret couldn't move. Her fingers dug into the arms of the chair, muscles locked in place. The static deepened, the buzzing morphing into something almost like whispering. The lights in her apartment flickered again, casting eerie, jerking shadows across the walls. The screen pulsed, a low vibration humming through the floor beneath her feet. She wanted to turn it off. She needed to turn it off, but she couldn't look away. The shape shifted, a slow, unnatural movement, as if adjusting, as if acknowledging her presence. Margaret's stomach lurched. She turned the TV off. The silence pressed in around her, thick and stifling. She forced herself to breathe, gripping the armrest to steady herself. It was just a malfunction. It had to be. But that night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she felt it. That same sensation. The same weight of unseen eyes. Watching. Waiting. And the next night when she turned the TV on again, because of course she did, the figure was even closer. Margaret barely recognized her apartment anymore. The air inside felt wrong, thicker, heavier, like it was pressing down on her skin. The corners of the room seemed darker than they should be, shadows stretching unnaturally long. The TV was the only source of light, its flickering static casting warped, shifting patterns along the walls. She hadn't turned it on this time. It had turned itself on. Margaret stood frozen in the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. The buzzing filled her ears, the white noise vibrating through her skull like an insect crawling beneath her skin. She had tried to ignore it, tried to leave the apartment for a few hours to clear her head, to convince herself she was imagining things. But the moment she stepped back inside, she knew. The figure was there, closer than ever. It no longer lingered at the edges of the screen. It was right at the glass now, its blurred form pressing against the static, as if the thin barrier between them was barely holding it back. Margaret's fingers twitched at her sides. She needed to unplug it, but her body wouldn't move. A deep hum rattled through the floor beneath her feet. The static flared, the shape shifting. It wasn't just watching her anymore. It was trying to get out. The lights flickered, the air thickened. A cold pressure crept along her spine, like unseen fingers dragging down her back. She took a step forward, the movement sluggish, as if the air itself resisted her. The screen distorted. The figure moved. A shadowed hand pressed against the glass. Margaret's breath hitched, her legs locked in place. The TV flickered violently, the buzzing growing so loud it rattled the furniture. The shadows in the room pulsed, stretching unnaturally, swallowing the walls, the floor, the ceiling. And then, the screen went black. The TV shut off. The silence was instant and absolute, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but charged. Waiting, Margaret stood there, her body stiff, her heartbeat a frantic staccato against her ribs. Then, slowly, so slowly, she turned around, and there it was, standing behind her, no longer trapped behind the screen, no longer just a shadow in the static. It was real, and it had finally crossed over.